Welcome everyone. Today we will embark on a brief yet captivating exploration of ancient China, focusing on 4 key topics. Brought to you by Frank, Maggie, Sarah and Julia. Join us as we unravel the rich history of ancient China and its lasting impact on our world today. First, we'll discover the adventures of Marco Polo, whose travels opened Western eyes to the wonders of the East. Next, we'll delve into the Ming Dynasty, a period of cultural and artistic flourishing that shaped China's identity. We will then transition to the age of exploration, examining how global trade routes connected China with the rest of the world. Finally, we'll explore the rise of trade in China, highlighting its role as a central hub in the global economy. Join us as we unravel the rich history of ancient China and its lasting impact on our world today. We'll begin with the story of Marco Polo.
Marco Polo was a Venetian merchant, explorer and writer whose travels to Asia and experiences in the court of Kublai Khan profoundly influenced European knowledge of the East. His family, involved in trade, encouraged him to pursue commerce. His father Niccolo and uncle Maffeo had just returned from a long journey. Despite this, they still decided to leave Venice again in 1271, this time taking Marco with them to the Mongol court in Asia. They first traveled to Acre, now in Israel, where they received letters from the Mongol emperor, where they learned that their friend Teoblado had become Pope Gregory X. They returned to Acre to get proper credentials and were joined by 2 friars who soon left the group. From Acre, the Polos moved on to Ayas in southeastern Turkey. They passed through various cities, including Erzurum and Tabriz, facing challenges like harsh deserts and bandits before reaching Hormuz on the Persian Gulf. Here, they decided to travel overland instead of risking a dangerous sea passage to India. So they crossed dry deserts into Khorasan in eastern Iran, eventually reaching more fertile lands in Badakhshan, Afghanistan. They might have spent about a year here, possibly due to illness. Marco also explored surrounding regions during this time. After leaving Badakhshan, the Polos headed to the Pamirs, the Central Asian highlands. They eventually reached Kashi in present-day Xinjiang, China, and joined the Silk Road, passing through several important oases before arriving at Shazhou, now Dunhuang. During their travels, the Polos met various cultures, including Muslims, Christians, and Buddhists. In the province of Gansu, they encountered a different civilization that was primarily Buddhist, but also influenced by Chinese culture. Around 1275, they finally reached the Mongol court, where they presented gifts, including sacred oil from Jerusalem and papal letters, to Kublai Khan, the Mongol ruler and founder of the Yuan dynasty. Polo became a favored guest and was appointed to various administrative roles, traveling throughout the vast empire. Marco and his family lived in the Mongol Empire for about 16 to 17 years, likely moving with the court between different locations, including Dadu, modern Beijing. They were employed in various roles, possibly as military advisors and officials, gaining the emperor's favor. Marco, who spoke several languages, was often sent on missions throughout the empire. He traveled to places like Yunnan and described the bustling city of Qinsei, now Hangzhou. He might have also held some administrative responsibilities like overseeing trade. Upon returning to Venice in 1295, Polo was captured during a conflict with Genoa. While imprisoned, he dictated his adventures to Rustichello da Pisa, resulting in The Travels of Marco Polo. This book became a significant text, inspiring future explorers like Christopher Columbus. After his release from captivity, Marco Polo returned to Venice and continued to engage in trade. He married, had three daughters, and lived a relatively prosperous life until his death in January 1324. His enduring fame is largely due to his adventurous spirit and remarkable tales he shared about the world beyond Europe. Marco Polo remains a pivotal figure in the history of exploration, representing the curiosity and ambition of the late medieval period. So now, let's go over some of Marco Polo's contributions and accomplishments. Marco Polo's detailed observations of Asian cultures, economies, and technologies provided a window into the East for Europeans. His experiences introduced new ideas and goods, such as coal, paper money, and exotic spices. Polo's accounts contributed to the European fascination with Asia, prompting further exploration and trade endeavors. His descriptions of wealth and splendor of the East motivated many to seek new routes to these riches. Marco Polo's legacy endures in the form of cultural exchanges and a greater understanding of geography. His travels helped bridge the gap between East and West, influencing trade routes that would shape global commerce for centuries, such as the Silk Road, the maritime trade routes, the spice trade, and the maritime spice routes, and the land routes to the east, example through Persia and Central Asia. He also contributed to the idea of bringing back paper money, and some even argue that his descriptions of coal, eyeglasses, and complex postal systems eventually led to the widespread use in Europe. Polo's writings are considered a catalyst for the European exploration that followed. They encouraged explorers like Christopher Columbus to seek new trade routes to Asia, leading to the age of exploration and the eventual establishment of global trade networks still seen today. My sources are history.com and Britannica.
The Ming Dynasty. The Ming Dynasty arose after a period of Mongol rule under the Yuan Dynasty, marked by heavy taxation, corruption, and unrest that led to widespread peasant revolts. Among these movements was the Red Turbans, led by Zhu Yuanzhang, who came from humble origins. Born a peasant in the 1330s, Zhu joined a Buddhist monastery, learning to read and write. He rose to prominence as a military leader, eventually uniting rebel forces and capturing Nanjing in 1356. In 1368, he declared himself Emperor Hongwu, marking the return of Han Chinese rule and establishing the Ming Dynasty. The Ming Dynasty's Golden Age. Hongwu focused on rebuilding and restoring China. He implemented agricultural reforms that boosted crop production, rebuilt irrigation systems, and distributed land to promote self sufficiency. This period saw flourishing arts, drama, poetry, and novels that became popular. The Ming also developed a disciplined military, with over 1 million troops recruited nationwide to maintain unity. They fortified borders, with the Great Wall becoming a significant defense structure against the Mongols. Cultural and economic achievements. The Ming Dynasty is remembered for its cultural renaissance. Architecture thrived, with a forbidden city in Beijing becoming a symbol of imperial might. Philosophy inspired classics such as Journey to the West, and publishing expanded, bringing encyclopedias and novels to a wider audience. Porcelain production advanced, meeting growing export demands, and cuisine also evolved, with new recipes that still remain central in China's cooking today. The decline and fall of the Ming Dynasty. Despite its achievements, the Ming Dynasty faced growing challenge. Economic decline and corruption weakened the government, while emperors indulged in extravagant lifestyles, neglecting administrative duties. The rigid tax system strained peasants, leading to unrest. And by the early 1600s, the dynasty was hollow, with weakened defenses. This allowed Manchu forces from the north to cross the Great Wall, leading to eventual fall of the Ming Dynasty in 1644. Legacy. The Ming Dynasty left an indelible mark on China. It fortified the Great Wall, established China as a dominant power in Asia, and contributed in world trade and culture. Its cultural achievements, from literature to architecture, still influence Chinese identity today.
As the Ming Dynasty faced internal decline, European powers were entering an era of global expansion. The period from the 15th to the 17th century, known as the Age of Exploration, began in Europe, with European powers such as Spain and Portugal embarking on overseas exploration and seeking new trade routes, wealth, and knowledge. While European powers focused on expansionism, China followed a slightly different approach. China had already established a highly productive economy during the Song Dynasty, which was a period marked by advancements in agricultural, trade, and urban development. Therefore, by the time European explorers embarked on their voyages, China was already engaged in their own exploratory voyages and extensive trade, which mainly involved exchanging luxury goods like silk and porcelain for silver. During the early 15th century, under the Ming Dynasty, China embarked on its own phase of exploration with the famous voyages of Admiral Zheng He. Admiral Zheng He was a Chinese explorer and diplomat who, during the 15th century, led large fleets to Southeast Asia, India, and Africa. The Chinese fleets at this time were composed of massive ships that were larger than anything Europe had at the time. These expeditions made by Zheng He were mainly focused on diplomacy, trade, and to showcase China's power, rather than to engage in colonization like European explorers. However, following Zheng He's death, China decided to stop further voyages and therefore dismantled their navy. Instead, the Ming Dynasty adopted an isolationist policy, which was focused on domestic stability and to prevent destabilization by limiting foreign influence. As a result, the Ming Dynasty turned inward and started focusing on defending its borders against Mongol threats instead of pursuing overseas exploration. This decision allowed European powers to dominate global sea routes and to expand their influence, while China mostly remained isolated. By the 16th century, European traders such as the Portuguese, Dutch, and British established a presence in China, and Macau became a key trading hub. Even though China adopted an isolationist policy, they allowed for limited trade with Europe that meant lots of strict conditions. Due to China's interaction with Europe, Jesuit missionaries such as Matteo Ricci brought European knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, and mapmaking. This kind of scientific knowledge was valued by the Chinese imperial court as it could help them improve governance and military technology, such as the imperial calendar, firearms, and cabins. However, China absorbed these ideas in a selective way and only used them for practical purposes, instead of fully adopting these European scientific methods and changing their own traditions. While Europe mostly focused on a scientific revolution and progress in technology, China focused on Confucian studies. Although this cautious approach meant limited participation for China, China still managed to spread advanced maritime technology such as the magnetic compass and shipbuilding techniques, which would influence global navigation. And thanks to China's extensive trade networks, Chinese goods such as porcelain, silk, and tea were also later on introduced to Europe, which set the stage for a new phase marked with a rise in trade.
The rise of trade in China that occurred during the 16th and 17th century was during the Ming, then Qing dynasty. The Ming Dynasty took place in the years 1368 to 1644. During this dynasty, the population doubled and ties to the Western world were made through trade expansion, and expansion such as of the tribute system. This entailed improved boats, or so-called flotillas, that allowed the Chinese to reach India, the Persian Gulf, and the east coast of Africa. This predated the European efforts. After some time, a new system was set in place, the maritime trade. This is the global movement of goods through sea routes, involving partnerships between nations, agencies, and industries to enhance security and efficiency in commerce. The effect of an expanded trading network was not only seen through the rapid economic growth, but also through the European presence within the empire. For instance, Chinese cuisine. As sweet potatoes and peanuts arrived, it opened up a new gastronomic horizon and flavor palette. Whereas in terms of exports, the Ming Dynasty was best known and beloved for their exports of porcelain. It did originate in the Tang Dynasty, but by perfecting it, the Ming could take the world by storm. The Qing, or also called Manchu Dynasty, followed suit in 1644 to 1912 by promoting and developing extensive relationships with other countries all over the world, some of them being Norway, Spain, America, Sweden, and France. The trade was conducted primarily in the three following cities: Macau, Canton, and Hong Kong. It was due to their geographical location neighboring the sea. Each city was large and had their own port hub, where trading could easily take place. The Chinese market structure developed a little more complex during the Qing dynasty. The number of markets and market towns grew, and these market structures became even more organized. The markets developed in hierarchy. Larger and central markets collected goods from smaller, more local below them. Meanwhile, more markets were set up to meet the needs for instance, local farmers and producers. Compared to earlier in time, when one had to travel far distances or wait until certain days when the market was open to sell products. The Chinese had control over trade with the West up until the 1840s, the time of the Opium War. The war was primarily between China and Britain, but also the Western powers. The war erupted due to the suppression of opium trade by China. It all started, though, with the trade imbalance of silver. China demanded silver in return for the great quantities of, for instance, tea, silk, and porcelain, exports that went to Europe. China ended up receiving around 40% of the total silver that originated in Mexico and Peru, and it was produced between the 14th and 17th century. The British disliked the fact that China had this much silver and attempted a correction. This correction being the introduction of opium. It proved to be highly addictive and a big issue to the Chinese society. All the while, Britain profited. China, in a sense, lost autonomy, and Britain took over the port in Hong Kong.
In conclusion, our exploration of ancient China has revealed its profound influence on our world today. From Marco Polo's adventurous journeys to the cultural richness of the Ming Dynasty and the vital trade networks that connected civilizations, we see how this remarkable history continues to shape our global landscape. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If you have any questions or thoughts, we'd love to hear them.